This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning, and we also take a look at the political pieces we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 9th of July, and I am your host, CS.
I'm AX.
And I'm Mo.
In the headlines today, Daily Nation, UHURU moves to stop NASA fallout. In the Standard, Raila to NASA partners, I owe you nothing. In the Star, why Kenyatta is keen on alliance with NASA chiefs. AX, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Why don't you start us off?
Oh, with pleasure. For the last week, Kalonzo Musyoka has been about the town, telling everyone who will hear him that he is ready to leave the NASA coalition. However, I'm here to tell him that this is the wrong move. Kalonzo, in order to bring about the change you wish to see in the world, you must master the art of seduction. Seduction is at the core of politics, and this is what I would like to remind him of today. According to Robert Greene in his book, The Art of Seduction, seduction is about power and manipulation as much as it is about romance. And right now, Kalonzo, your actions are to the alliance what doom is to mosquitoes. Deadly. According to Greene, every seduction has two elements that you must analyze and understand. First, Kalonzo must understand himself and what is seductive about him. And second, Kalonzo needs to understand who he is trying to seduce and what he needs to do to win them over. Unfortunately, Kalonzo has failed on both accounts, but the crucial failure comes from the lack of self-awareness. If you don't understand your own seductive powers, how can you deploy them to good effect? And as a result, Kalonzo has become an anti-seducer, actively repelling his targets, who are Baba Man and the Kenyan public. Let me address Kalonzo directly. Specifically, it would appear that you have become a reactor. You have become anxious about being left behind and are reacting to that by lashing out. Insecurity is a difficult stench to mask, and all the grandstanding and chest beating will only highlight your insecurity. So how can Kalonzo fix this issue? Well, once he understands what is seductive about him, and he realizes the fact that he has decades of political experience under his belt, Kalonzo must ask himself a simple question. What do I want?
Yep.
Remember, politics is all about interest, and seduction is how you will secure your interest. So, Kalonzo, what do you want? Because as anyone can attest, a desperate man without vision is not attractive. Remember what you came to do and hold to the clarity of that vision. Unfortunately, Kenyans cannot do the work for you, but in the very least, if you do your part, you will give the nation a break from your incessant posturing.
In other words, our brother Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka is suffering from a bout of FOMO.
Yes.
FOMO.
Yes, FOMO, fear of missing out.
I really should get that book, Art of Seduction.
Yes, you
Oh,
should.
thanks, AX.
Welcome to the show, Mo, your debut.
Thank you guys. Today, I'd like to talk about the Standard's headline, Raila to NASA partners, I owe you nothing. Oh, that's quite powerful. I'll be addressing you directly, Mr. Odinga. Granted, you've achieved quite a lot and we congratulate you. But do you really believe that this is the time to get into fights with your coalition partners? During your Radio Citizen interview, you quickly clarified that NASA is not a party. It's just a coalition of sorts formed to bring three leaders together during an election year. Fact. You also went on to clarify that there is no money to split four ways because the other leaders do not qualify for the funds. Oh dear. Please allow me to remind you of just two things. Firstly, the reason you formed NASA in the first place is because each of these leaders has something you need. Ethnic voting blocks. Kalonzo brings with him the Kamba vote, and both Mudavadi and Wetangula bring the Luya vote. Secondly, it is a known secret that when you work with others, you're expected to share the fruit of your spoils. Give them the money. You, sir, might be suffering from some form of myopia. In the world of marketing, Theodore Levitt describes marketing myopia as a short-sighted and inward-looking approach to marketing which focuses on fulfilling immediate needs of a company rather than focusing on the marketing needs of a consumer. Mr. Odinga, it would seem that you're losing focus by saying that you owe these guys nothing. As they say, it is sometimes better to lose the battle than win a war. Well, as for you, bearded sisters, instead of challenging Raila to a game of picky ponky by threatening him with a mass exodus if he does not choose any of you for the presidency, you should be strategizing on how to leverage your voting blocks to get the best seat at the table. Come on, guys. And lastly, a thought. For Stalin, the Stalin, to become leader of the Soviet Union. Guys, the Soviet Union, he formed alliances with the best minds around him. So, Raila, if you do not lose sight like Stalin did not, then 2022 will be yours for the taking. Listen to me, my friend.
Yes, incredibly well said.
Speaking of people who are losing sight and also
usual.
losing focus,
Of course.
William Samoei Arap Ruto is suffering from delusions of grandeur, and his delusions are worsened by bouts of toxic irony. Let me explain. This past week, Kenya's nominal deputy president crossed over to Uganda to join Museveni in launching a facility for the development of vaccines. This is the same deputy president who earlier in the year told us that wealthy Kenyans should pay for vaccines because those who can afford it should pay for it. The toxic irony here is that this took place a short while after President Uhuru Kenyatta gave us a roadmap for inoculating 26 million adult Kenyans by the end of next year, free of charge. William Ruto didn't even attend any of the conferences that were organized to address the pandemic, and he didn't even shy from acknowledging that he wasn't in attendance. All the while, he indirectly criticized and disparaged the president for not focusing on COVID, when in reality, the president had been working on an elaborate plan to inoculate all adults free of charge, while also holding up the Kenyan economy with a major 8-point stimulus program. The deputy president, meanwhile, had clearly absconded his duties and removed himself from important matters of state at one of Kenya's most trying times. But now, he crosses the border to Uganda to advance our neighbors' policy agenda and to celebrate their progress in addressing COVID. This is toxic irony because he has barely attended to his constitutional duty to the Kenyans who gave him the mandate to begin with. Even if he perceives that he has a connection with the Kalenjins in Karamoja in Uganda, he should tell us what he did to help the president address the COVID pandemic, even for the sake of the Kalenjins in Rift Valley here at home. I highly suspect the answer to his question would be wanting. Secondly, the reason Ruto is suffering from delusions of grandeur is because he thinks himself a peer to Museveni. Mr. Ruto should be careful not to deceive himself. The chaotic aggregate he calls the Hustler Nation is not the national resistance movement. And the mansions he has built in Sugoi do not compare to the jungles of the Luwero Triangle, from where Museveni launched his campaign to unseat Milton Obote. The contrast is stark. Museveni in his prime was a man driven by revolutionary purpose and cogent ideology. Ruto is a man driven by insatiable lust for power and a desire for the nectar of imperium. Museveni set up well-organized national resistance councils and ensured the citizens were taught history, politics, and economics, so that their belief in the cause was grounded in a depth of understanding of what it is they were fighting for. Ruto doesn't even understand the economics behind the bottom-up manenos he pontificates and his wheelbarrow philosophy. It only reveals his divisive tendencies and the class warfare he is instigating. Museveni in his prime was a philosopher king who led a movement of self-conscious philosopher warriors. Ruto, on the other hand, is a self-absorbed demagogue who is leading a chaotic aggregate. And the metaphorical equivalent of a chaotic aggregate is a sack of potatoes. It is bereft of a sound unifying ideology. A sack of potatoes has no class consciousness. DP Ruto is frankly deluded if he thinks that Museveni is his peer as a leader, intellectually or otherwise. In fact, President Uhuru is more of an intellectual peer to Sevo. Compared to Ruto's wheelbarrow philosophy, our president is making us alive to compelling ideas anchored in big push investments which will lay a foundation for the coming century. Policies anchored in economic acceleration, restoration of dignity, and political inclusion under a frame of political stabilization. Once again, we at the Fort Hall School of Government are convinced that we are dealing with two very different visions of leadership.
Wow.
Now, we have a three-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines. We ask ourselves three questions. Is the headline topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, thoughtful or just plain lazy? Who do we want to give it to?
Oh, none of them. These headlines kind of remind me of a sack of potatoes. Absolutely no consciousness.
Yeah, I think these people need to hire new people. I'm not impressed. Never impressed at all.
There's a little lack of imagination.
It's
But I will
yeah.
say, I want to propose, as we did yesterday, a headline from the Fifth Estate Gazette, and it's inspired a little bit by the Star, why Kenyatta is keen on alliance with NASA chiefs. So the Fifth Estate Gazette headline is Uhuru Engineering Elite Consensus.
Ooh, that's a winning headline.
That's
That's a winning headline.
Nice one. Nice one, CS.
Oh, what does this mean? Do I get to toss them? Please tell me I get
Yes,
to toss
please.
them.
Toss right now. Boom.
And now for our final thought. It is inspired by a book titled The Weirdest People in the World by Joseph Heinrich. But before that, kindly remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and switch on notifications. AX, why don't you give us a rundown of the books we looked at this week?
Great, I will. So this week at Winning Headlines, we have been looking at anthropology. Anthropology is the study of man and society, and the books that we've been looking at this week have definitely taught us a lot about man and society. On Tuesday, we looked at the book BS Jobs by David Graeber. In this book, David Graeber, an anthropologist, seeks a diagnosis and source for what he calls the useless jobs that no one wants to talk about. And he thinks that these jobs are everywhere. On Wednesday, we looked at the book The Geography of Genius, authored by Eric Weiner. In this book, the author sets out to examine the connection between our surroundings and our most innovative ideas. He explores the history of places and walks the same paths as the geniuses who flourished in these settings, to see if the spirit of what inspired figures like Socrates, Michelangelo, and Leonardo still remains. In these places, Weiner asks, what is in the air and can we bottle it? And on Thursday, we reviewed the book Foragers, Farmers, and Fossil Fuels, How Human Values Evolve by Ian Morris. The book looks at culture as a society's way to adapt to sources of energy. The better adapted they become, the bigger the slice of available energy that they can extract, and the better equipped they will be to displace other cultures. The author argues that how societies get fuel for energy from the environment determines their values, because human cultures and values evolve over time. When a society's ability to capture energy changes, its values changes.
And now on to today's final thought. Today's text, The Weirdest People in the World, was written by Joseph Heinrich, who is an American professor of human evolutionary biology at Harvard University. And before that, he was a professor of psychology and economics at the University of British Columbia.
Wow.
His interests include how culture shaped our species' genetic evolution. In his earlier book, The Secret of Our Success, How Culture is Driving Human Evolution, Domesticating Our Species and Making Us Smarter, Joseph Heinrich chronicled the success of the human species, grounding it in our ability to learn from each other and the core evolution of culture and genes, a story that takes place over hundreds of thousands of years. He argued that the key quality that makes humans different from other animals is our biological ability and inclination to imitate each other. This cultural evolution allows us to change much more rapidly within a few hundred years than we would with genetic evolution, which takes thousands of years. The Weirdest People in the World is effectively a sequel that zooms in on the last roughly 1,500 years to understand why the West was so successful in its rapid growth and conquest of much of the rest of the world. He attributes a great deal to Christianity and especially Catholicism and its role in altering kinship networks and absolute allegiance to family, which had the effect of enabling people to subscribe to abstract ideas such as nations. He also highlights how the Protestant movement had a role in influencing individual reading and interpretation, which in turn made us more individualistic. Heinrich argues that all this had an impact on our psychology as it helped lay the foundation for individual rights, democracy, markets, innovation, and the success of the West enjoys today. Aspects of this have been imitated elsewhere, helping to spread prosperity. This resulted in weird people. Weird being a double entendre for highlighting how different we are from people across the history of time, but it is also an acronym for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Weird. The general observation he makes is that unlike much of the world today and most people who have ever lived, weird people are highly individualistic, self-obsessed, control-oriented, non-conformist, and analytical. They focus on themselves, their attributes, accomplishments, and aspirations over their relationships and social roles. The book is very well researched, and the author, who is arguably a polymath, took on a multidisciplinary approach, drawing on a wide range of other research areas by economists, psychologists, anthropologists, evolutionary biologists, and many other areas of study.
Wow, thank you, CS. That was so comprehensive.
Yeah, it was.
So when I picked up the book, the title itself was quite funny to me because I did not think you could get any more weird people like, than say maybe Sonko, Ruto. Anyway, I digress. Weird people. Anyway, so two things stood out to me. Firstly, it was Buckley's experience of the Aboriginals of Australia. So he and his team, in fact, utterly failed to survive by hunting and gathering despite starting with about 4 days' worth of supplies and entering one of Australia's most bountiful ecologies. They couldn't find enough food, start fires, build shelters, or make the necessary spears, nets, canoes, all that jazz. These men couldn't survive as hunter-gatherers on a continent where humans had lived as foragers for nearly 60,000 years. They couldn't survive. So my question was, why did our brains evolve, yet these guys could barely survive in their newfound territory? I mean, they had all this knowledge anyway. Secondly, as humans, we've evolved genetically to rely on learning from others to acquire an immense amount of behavioral information, including motivations, heuristics, and beliefs that are central to our survival and reproduction. Guys, we need to learn from each other.
Yes,
and we do that. This ability to learn from one another is so powerful compared to other species. We alone can accumulate increasingly complex bodies of cultural knowledge, which is related to everything from sophisticated tech, food processing techniques, to new grammatical tools and expanding packages of social norms. Guys, we are superhuman sometimes. But then I do not agree with the latter, because some of our actions and behaviors are like those of animals. We never learn from one another. Okay, animals, I've taken it a bit a notch, but let me explain. Just look at the beautiful history of our country. This country is beautiful. So you'd expect that some people would learn that a lack of development is detrimental to societies. Yet a certain chicken seller is taking us in that very direction. Why is he not learning? His loyal followers behave as they too do not know what they experienced back in the day. There was a time when crime was rife. The theme for the country was nchi ya kitu kidogo, but we've actually come so far from that. Honestly, these particular individuals should have a book written about them. The weirdest animals in the world. Sorry, guys.
Now, so far, I think both of your reviews have been incredibly positive, or at best, incredibly neutral. Allow me to rectify that.
Okay.
Though Heinrich's theory is certainly interesting, it leaves something unsaid. In painting the West's success as a byproduct of their erosion of kin bonds, Heinrich suggests that the rest failed because of those very bonds. And it is no surprise that the countries in the rest and the countries not as wealthy as the rest, as the West, for example, Kenya, India, Brazil, or Vietnam, are characterized as dominated by those bonds. Heinrich characterizes as exceptional a practice that was practiced elsewhere in the world. Pre-colonial Kenyan communities would intermarry, sharing skills, knowledge, and tools with each other. Ethiopia has been opposed to cousin marriage for much of its history. Meanwhile, at the same time, the prohibitions that Heinrich praises were ignored by the Europeans he raises up. Lest we forget that Charles II of Spain's family tree was basically a circle. Heinrich paints a picture of a post-tribal Europe, even though Europe is still very much tribal. In fact, what is a country but a large tribe? Heinrich either forgets or willfully ignores the role this tribal thinking played in colonization. It was for the tribes of Europe that my tribe was castigated. It was for the tribe of Europe that my country was colonized. And it was for the tribes of Europe that I am no longer supposed to take pride in my own tribe. Heinrich has ignored a fundamental truth. The dissolution of immediate clan ties did not overwrite the evolutionary practices that cause us to favor our own. It's literally nature. They just extended these practices to more people, making bigger and bigger teams. And I reckon no one on this panel would have been welcomed as a team member in Europe, if you know what I mean.
Nope.
Ultimately, the things Heinrich leaves unsaid are far more interesting and significant than the things he says. That the rest failed because we could not see beyond our parents, siblings, aunties, or cousins is inherently a destructive idea. That we failed because we are simply not weird enough. Yeah.
Interesting.
Very compelling argument.
Interesting.
On a week when we had no winning cartoons and we had a winning headline from the Festa State Gazette, we kindly remind you to find us on GoTV, Pang Free to Air, and on YouTube. And finally, we leave you with this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. A genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus.
Ooh, very good. Very good.
Okay.
Good night.